bizarre structure has been detected towering high above Saturn's hexagon. There is something strange over Saturn's north pole. A tremendous structure towering high above the clouds indicates that the planet's peculiar hexagonal formation is much, much bigger than was initially apparent. The data comes from Cassini, which a year after its demise plunging into Saturn's opaque atmosphere, contaminated with nuclear waste, is still leading us to new discoveries. When the probe commenced its observations in 2004 during the southern summer, it clocked a warm high-altitude vortex over the planet's south pole. Meanwhile, Saturn's north pole contains the famous hexagonal cloud pattern, but we didn't think it had a vortex until now. Would that be a Birkeland current? The long-term study has found a similar vortex forming over the North Pole as the North approaches summer. High up in the stratosphere, and just like the jet stream below it, the vortex is hexagonal. The edges of this newly found vortex appear to be hexagonal, precisely matching a famous and bizarre hexagonal cloud pattern we see deeper down in Saturn's atmosphere, said planetary scientist Lee Fletcher of the University of Leicester in the UK. The University of Leicester. Crazy.
Leicester.
Leicester? L-E-I-C-E-S-T-E-R. Okay. I guess that'd be better than Leicester. While we did expect to see a vortex of some kind at Saturn's North Pole as it grew warmer, its shape is really surprising. Either a hexagon has spawned spontaneously and identically in two different altitudes, one lower in the clouds and one high in the stratosphere, or the hexagon is in fact a towering structure spanning a vertical range of several hundred kilometers. Ever since its discovery in the early 1980s by the Voyager spacecraft, the hexagon has been a puzzle for planetary scientists. It wasn't until 2006 that Cassini got a good photo of it, and scientists have been trying to figure out more about it ever since. The structure is strangely symmetrical and is made by an atmospheric jet stream, with winds blowing up to 500 kilometers per hour, 300 miles per hour, and it's huge, measuring a massive 30,000 kilometers, 20,000 miles, across. Earth has a diameter of 12,742 kilometers, 7,917.5 miles. 2 Earths could fit inside the hexagon, with room to spare. It's pretty cool. It also rotates at roughly the same rate as the planet itself, indicating that the structure is tied to the planet's rotation, much like the polar front jet stream here on Earth. And a previous investigation found that using rotation, the hexagon shape could be replicated in fluid in a lab. Cassini studied the hexagon in detail using its composite infrared spectrometer, CIRS, in 2006. At this point, it was still northern winter on Saturn. Its year is around 30 Earth years. Now that's more like it. So its summers and winters are long, which meant the North Pole was in shadow, but CIRS could circumvent this hurdle since it can observe thermal radiation. However, the upper atmosphere was still too cold for reliable infrared observations, so Cassini confined itself to studying the cloud layer. But in 2009, Saturn's North Pole started to emerge from winter. The atmosphere warmed and things turned around. We were able to use the CIRS instrument to explore the northern stratosphere for the first time, from 2014 onwards, said planetary scientist Sandrine Gerlet of the Laboratoire de Météorologie Dynamique in France. The Laboratoire Météorologie Dynamique.
Laboratoire de Météorologie Dynamique.
Laboratoire de Météorologie Dynamique
in France as the polar vortex became more and more visible.
We noticed it had hexagonal edges and realized that we were seeing the pre-existing hexagon at much higher altitudes than previously thought. It towered hundreds of kilometers over the clouds and showed quite different behavior
from the southern vortex. It's cooler,
not as mature, and, of course, the South Pole has no hexagon. But since wind conditions change dramatically with altitude,
the fact that the hexagon shape persists so much higher than the cloud tops is a baffling conundrum. One way that wave information can leak upwards is via a process called evanescence,
where the strength of a wave decays with height,
but is just about strong enough
to still persist up into the stratosphere, said Fletcher. Well, of course, we know it has to be an electric event. We simply need to know more, because we refuse to see the electricity. It's quite frustrating, anyhow, that we only discovered this stratospheric hexagon right at the end of Cassini's lifespan. And why did you kill it? Afraid what you might find? Saturn's northern summer has already peaked,
with the solstice occurring May 2017. Of course, time flies. There are still several years left of summer, and it's expected that the North Pole vortex will continue to develop. However, with Cassini's mission ended, it's uncertain whether scientists will be able to observe these changes. The Cassini spacecraft continued to provide new insights and discoveries right up to the very end. Without a capable spacecraft like Cassini,
these mysteries would have remained unexplored. By an international team sending a sophisticated robotic explorer
to a previously unexplored destination, with results that keep flowing even when the mission itself has ended. The team's research has been published in the journal Nature Communications. The end. Saturn's Polar Vortex by Stephen Smith. May 30th, 2018. Electricity influences Saturn's environment. The picture at the top of the page could be mistaken for recent images of Jupiter's great red spot. However, the swirling vortex is actually located in the center of Saturn's vast hexagonal north polar formation. Hexagons and other polygons can sometimes occur in hurricanes, so astrophysicists believe that fluid dynamics can explain what they call a mysterious phenomenon. In 2010, physicists from Oxford University spun a 30-liter cylinder of water with a ring of viscous green dye inside spinning faster than the cylinder. Their thinking was that a jet stream analog could provide a plausible description of what is happening on Saturn if several factors are ignored. First, they did not produce concentric rings around the hexagon, each with different temperatures. Second, Saturn's poles are hotter than theories predict. Third, there are aurorae at the poles. Fourth, there is electric charge flow connecting Saturn's poles to its family of moons. Additionally, the winds in the polar vortex are 4 times faster than any hurricane. Nor does it move around. Such kinetic experiments are insufficient in scope. Since electrical effects are not considered, perhaps the kinetic model should be stood on its head. The polygons in hurricanes should be reevaluated in the light of electrical theories. Electricity flowing through plasmas can create a central column surrounded by concentric cylinders. As retired professor of electrical engineering, Dr. Donald Scott proved, filamentary structures form evenly spaced vortices surrounding the column, As the filaments rotate around one another, a hexagonal cross-section forms inside. In an electric universe, electricity moves along charged Birkeland currents connecting the sun. Energy flows most strongly into the giant gas planets because their charge differential with the sun is greater than that of their smaller rocky cousins. The electric sun is what drives so-called meteorological activity on Saturn. Many years ago, planetary scientists admitted that Saturn's polar hurricane cannot be explained. The driving forces behind the motion, and indeed the global motion of Saturn's atmosphere, still need to be understood. Their lack of understanding is because electrodynamic circuits initiate anomalous heating on Saturn. Not only Saturn, but the other gas planets as well. Jupiter and Neptune display hot poles. The double eye vortex on Venus, along with the hot poles on Enceladus. Titan and Io will also benefit from acknowledging the principal tenets of an electric universe. Stephen Smith. Prehistoric Dacia, the Pelasgians, the Titans. The most ancient, the most glorious among all Pelasgian tribes were the Titans. They were called by the authors Genus Antiquum Terrae and Terrae Fili Virgil. According to the Theogonies of Hesiod, the first children conceived with Gaia and Uranus were the Titans, 12 in number, 6 men and 6 women, and their names were the following: Oceanus, Koios, Cryos, Hyperon, Leptos, and Kronos, Rhea, Tethys, Thea, Mnemosyne, Mnemosyne, and Phoebe. In fact, most of these names represent only simple personifications of geographical regions, rivers, and mountains. 1. Hyperon, a word whose meaning is person from beyond, represented, that's an odd name, represented the region from beyond the mountain, Transylvania of today, or the country from beyond, as the people from Romania call it. Anonymous Bele, Ragmaturus, Terra Ultra Savannah, and Ultra Silius. The Odyssey mentions Hyperia, or the country beyond, situated close to the Cyclops, from where Lafici immigrated. Tethys corresponds to the forms of Tetsis, and Tetsis or Tetsis conform to its ancient pronunciation. In the Old Greek language, the letter th had a sibilant sound, and s was added to t, and sometimes th represented z. For example, Zeus was in reality the same word as Theos. According to the ancient legends, Tethys had been married with Oceanus Potamos.
It's interesting the Vietnamese celebrate Tet,
or is true, and in this way they gave birth to a large number of names of big and important rivers, along which were settled various Pelasgian populations. Hesiod, by its name as well as by the geography of the legends of Theogony, Tethys is only a personification of a big river from the western parts of ancient Dacia, which flows into the Danube. In medieval documents and chronicles of Hungaria, Titia, Tisa, and Thesia, the epithets Canna, Candida, Fincunda, and Magna, given to the goddess Tethys, are also characteristics of the same river. Themis, a country of this goddess, was in the northern parts of Illyria, near the sources of the river Oceanus, or Istru. From a geographical point of view, Themis personified the antiquity to the river today called Timis, which springs from the southwestern Carpathians of Transylvania and flows into the Danube. One of the daughters of the goddess of Themis was called dice, the goddess of justice. She just throws the dice. She represented by name and attributions. According to Herodotus, the most just of all Thracians, and according to Homer in the Iliad, the inhabitants from the north of Thrace were the most just of all peoples, and they were called
Getae.
the Getae. Thea, a lot of these names are just really hard to pronounce. The Hyperboreans, who dwelt, as we know, north of the lower Danube, were considered descendants of the Titans. Atlas, the most powerful king of the Hyperboreans, who later was transformed into a huge mount, was also a Titan, or in other words, the Titans were the dominant tribe of this kingdom, Latona, the Hyperborean virgin, who, being chased by Juno, wandered through the world, and gives birth to Apollo and Diana in the island of Delos, was the daughter of a Titan. Titans played a very important role in the history of the First Pelasgian Empire. They formed the most ancient, most noble, most energetic class in the social hierarchy. During the times of Uranus and Saturn, the first kings of the Pelasgian state were from the family of the Titans. The Titans administered all the public functions. They were at the same time the religious chiefs of the Pelasgian state, for which they were also called Titan gods. Homer, Hesidius, Theogony. It's funny, theogony, I think we call theology. The Titans dethroned Uranus and gave the empire to Saturn, after which they sustained together a 10-year difficult war against Jove. But Saturn was defeated and Jove occupied the throne of Uranus. Unhappy with this change, the Titans rose again under the leadership of Atlas, wanting to oust Jove and reinstate Saturn, but their fate was unfavorable. They were defeated the second time, Hyginus, and their entire class was exterminated. Oh, nice. Some were shut into deep and vast cave called Tartaros. Hesidius, Theogony, while others left the region from near the Istru, immigrated and scattered through various Pelasgian lands. The figure of a Titan from the Egyptian planisphere of Kircher, and they got the guy holding two snakes. The Battle of the Titans with Jove took place in the woodlands of Tartessius, near Cerna, on the territory of ancient Dacia, in the same region which figures under the name Sidereal Pylea at Homer, Iliad, Hesidius, Theogony, or the mountains near the cataracts of the Danube. Now, I don't know if any of this is true, but I'm just reading this from this person about the Pelasgians, and a lot of it might just be metaphors, I don't know, but I just find it really interesting because I really am intrigued by the older a civilization is, the more intrigued I am to learn about it, so it's just checking it out. I'm not endorsing it, I'm just reading. In the Battle of Gade, the Roman general Crassus caught the brother of King Dapix, and afterwards he went to the vast and strong cave where the great number of the inhabitants of that land had taken refuge with their most precious objects and their flocks. In this cave, the legend tells us, had taken refuge the Titans, when defeated by the gods. The etymology and form of the name Titans is not Greek. Regarding to the ancient meaning of this word, Homer tells us that the Titans, proto-parents of the gods and the illustrious men, Orphic hymn, the Titans are called the proto-parents of our parents, Pauli. We have therefore the explanation of the word Titans, with all the meaning of
Patres and progenitores.
Patres and progenitors. The etymology of this name is reduced then, by its form and meaning, to the radical tata or teta, parent, father, parent. It results, therefore, that the term Titans is identical by its origin and meaning with the Romanian form Titani, forefathers. With the ousting of Saturn from the empire, the political role of the so-called Titani ceases. Their numerous class, rich, powerful, and superb, is completely extinguished. Oh, really? The Illuminati, maybe, of the time? Some are destroyed in a great civil war. Couldn't imagine that ever happening. Which ends with the catastrophe at Tartessius. Others are shut in dark caves, Tartaros, and those who could escape the fury of the victors are forced to find another country, Some take refuge in Italy. Others scatter through Heleta, Asia Minor, Hispania, and the northern parts of Europe, Germany. Among the most ancient tribes of Rome, the historical traditions mention the so-called Tatienses. These Tatini formed together with two other tribes called the Ramnes and Lucers.
Ramnes and Luceres.
Ramnes and Luceres, the wealthiest, most noble, and high social class of ancient Rome. They are called patres, and are considered as all the public affairs of the Roman state were in the hand of these parties. They alone administered, during a number of centuries, all the priestly, civil, and military functions. In the beginning, they considered themselves as the only intermediaries between gods and state. They were kind of Titania's theoi. They formed in the Roman state a permanent council of governors. They had the right to designate the king's successor. With them rested the decision of war and peace. Sounds like the Senate. Sure of their ancient glory, they considered themselves a class of a different nationality and a different blood than the other poor, uncultured citizens of obscure origins, whom they called plebes. Livy. Well, there you go. That's still going on today. Their traditional and privileged name of patres is also mentioned in the tabule. The origin of this patriarchal institution, of this Senate composed of representatives of certain ancient families, was without doubt predating the epoch of Romulus. It's just like the Senate today. You notice a guy spends his whole life in the Senate. Next thing you know, his son's in there. His cousin. And it's huge with nepotism. That's why I stopped voting, because I think it's all horse poop. It belonged to the original organization of the Pelasgian society, or in other words, the fundamental organization of Rome was that which the Pelasgians had in the times of the Titans. And they haven't given it up since. They've had it ever since. They've been in charge since the beginning. We find other remains of the noble and famous tribe of the Titans scattered around the Aegean Mediterranean Sea. As Philochorus tells us, one of the ancient Titans had settled in Attica, a powerful Titan with the name of Tityus, son of Gaia, was mentioned as king of Eubae, Apollodorus. Finally, a tribe with the name Titi appears in the territory of Hispania, even at the time when this peninsula was not conquered by the Romans. They had a particular sympathy for the Roman people, a similarity, parents of Rome, towards them. Their legates were admitted in the Senate, and although they were barbarians, they were permitted to speak in their national language. Traces of the name of the ancient Titans from the lower Danube have been also preserved in the medieval documents of Hungary. A village with the name of Tathan, today Tetani, is mentioned at 1205 close to Buda. Another village, Tethun, was around 1279 in the country Simagiu, a wealthy and powerful family of nobles whose possessions were between the rivers Drava and Sava, is mentioned in the documents of Hungary with the name Genus Tethan. Finally, Tetinius Lucius appears on a Roman inscription from Dalmatia. I'm almost done here. It isn't anything like I thought it was going to be. That's what I mean. It can really get into the minutia. Finally, we note here that in old Romanian folk ballad, the parents or the senators of the city Brasov in Transylvania. It's funny, parents and senators are similar. That's what it means. Are called Tatori Turguli, and this name is attributed to them in a nationally good meaning, in no way ironic. At north of the lower Danube, the term Tartar comes from a very remote age. Greek historian Herodotus tells us that Hercules had learned the art of the bow and arrow from a Scythian called Teutaros. This shepherd from north of the lower Danube was therefore from the nation of the ancient Titans. In Greek theogonies, Saturn has also the epithet Tartaros, meaning father. In Egypt, though, Saturn was called more correctly Teutonian, and was invoked in the following terms: parent of parents, great from the first time. Finally, Apollo, the god of the sun, who also had the epithet Titan, was venerated in some parts of Rome under the name Tortor. And Suetonius tells us, from the ethnic point of view, the Titans belong to the Pelasgian nation. In the genealogy of prehistoric peoples, Titan, the proto-parent of the Titans, figures as a grandson of the king Pelasgi, Apollodorus. Wow, that was a wild chapter for the giants. Well, that should be interesting, then I'm going to call it.
For the 7 planets, because the stellar cult worshipped the planets and the 7 great gods that were the 7 planets. So they get the week. That's why a week isn't just 3 days, 10 days, 15 days, 14 days, 6 days. It's 7 days. Now, each cult would have additional feast days assigned to them, of course, some which would closely coincide, others which were more specific. In fact, the hands of a clock also represent these cults and their division of time. That's right. Not only on a wristwatch do you have the 12 demarcated zones, but you have 3 hands on a clock. The hour hand for Horus, the sun, the min hand for minute, which was the ancient name of the moon, min, and the quick ticking hand, which is either for Mercury, the fastest god, or for the earth, for terrestrial time. The 3 hands of time. I want to emphasize again at this point that there was another little division on a timeline. It's very important to realize that if we create a timeline from, say, 25,000 years BC up until the period of the Ptolemies in Egypt, that's Alexandrian period, the last of the dynasties, what we call Egypt lasted that long. Starts 25,000 years ago and comes up to the time of the invasion of the Greeks. Something incredible must have been happening in that time, because we have to realize that that's a very long, expansive time. In fact, if you take every other age that came later, and I'm talking about the Alexandrian period, I'm talking about the Christian period, or the Grecian period, the Hellenistic period, the Romanesque period, the Renaissance, the Christian period that came then. We move into the neoclassical period, and then we have the modern age. Take it all. Multiply it by 3, and still the period that we know of Egypt was longer. But just for this moment in time, realize that there was another important division between these 4 great cults of power. As I said earlier, the stellar and the lunar cult had women as equals, and often women were the dominant rulers of the clans and the nations, and were in senior positions, mystically, religiously, and also politically. Whereas in the Saturnian and solar cult, and this is a key point to remember, the role of women was substantially diminished. We're going to see a little bit more of that later. Now, the male gods of Egypt and the pharaoh himself were ambassadors of the feminine goddess Numenon. Okay, Numenon just means presence or spiritual energy, something rare and otherworldly.
It's moving back against the wall. It's backing up. It's moving away from them.
He sees them, Garvey.